Imagine settling into the soft leather of Seat 2A, the world slipping away beneath you as the engines hum to life. You're calm, you're sure you belong. Then, without warning, you're tapped on the shoulder and told you must move. What would you do if every glance in your direction felt like a question mark? What if a flight attendant, fueled by unspoken bias, decided you did not belong at 30,000 feet? And what if the only reason your dignity is restored is because you dared to make one phone call? Meet Elijah Carter, a quiet, determined teen whose only crime was traveling in first class. As prejudice collides with power, he faces a choice: stay silent and accept it, or stand firm and change an entire airline's culture. What happens when fear meets conviction, when silence yields to action, and who pays the price when privilege is weaponized? Prepare to soar into a story of injustice, resilience, and transformation. Hit like if you believe respect is non-negotiable. Share this video to spark the conversation, and don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell, because this journey is just beginning. The cabin of Solstice Air Flight 1827 hummed with a polished kind of stillness, the kind only found in the first-class section of a premium airline. Every detail had been designed to soothe, from the faint scent of bergamot and leather to the soft rustle of newspapers being unfolded and carefully refolded. The seats gleamed with matte black leather and brushed brass accents. Attendants glided down the aisle with an almost choreographed grace, offering champagne or citrus-infused sparkling water with discreet smiles. Elijah Carter sat in Seat 1A, quietly gazing through the oval window as the world beyond the tarmac blurred in a soft pre-flight drizzle. At 17, he looked older in moments like these, when he was silent, still, and lost in thought. His frame was lean, athletic from years of track and field, but not overly tall. He wore a fitted charcoal hoodie, black jeans, and a crisp pair of white sneakers. Nothing about his outfit screamed luxury, but it was clean, intentional, and dignified. His backpack sat at his feet, a worn leather satchel with a tiny brass tag that read E. Carter. He had flown first class before, but it never felt casual, not because of the seats or the food, but because of how the world reacted to seeing someone like him there. Black, young, quiet, alone. Elijah had learned to carry himself with a blend of quiet confidence and practiced emotional armor. His mother used to say he had old soul eyes, the kind that had seen too much too soon, and still refused to stop hoping. She had been a teacher, a listener, a guardian of dignity. She passed away 3 months ago. Cancer, fast, and brutal. This flight was his first alone since her funeral. Seattle was his destination, the city where his father lived. Leon Carter, a man Elijah had only met 3 times in his life, and only because the law required it. CEO of Solstice Air, one of the fastest-growing luxury airlines in the country. Elijah had never felt close to him. The connection was paper-thin, like a faded photograph, visible but distant. After his mother's passing, Leon had called. "I want you to come stay for a few weeks," he had said. Elijah had expected an offer for therapy, maybe a check. Not this. Still, something in his gut had said yes. Maybe curiosity, maybe hope, maybe just needing to breathe air that didn't remind him of hospital antiseptic and unanswered prayers. Now, here he was, boarding pass digitally confirmed, seat assigned, ticket purchased directly by the CEO's office. First class not as a gift, but a gesture, a quiet, awkward beginning. A flight attendant had smiled at him as he boarded, though her eyes flicked to his hoodie. He noticed, but didn't react. He had trained himself not to. He took his seat, placed his backpack beneath his feet, and exhaled. The woman in seat 1B arrived shortly after. Late 40s, Hispanic, slim navy suit, wire-rimmed glasses. She offered a polite nod and slid into her seat without fuss. A faint scent of jasmine and coffee trailed her movement. Elijah returned the nod, then returned his gaze to the window. Rain streaked along the glass. Ground crews darted beneath reflective yellow ponchos, loading the cargo hold with quiet efficiency. The hum of the jet engines rising and falling was strangely calming. He pulled his headphones from his pocket. Over-ear, noise-canceling, the kind his mom had saved up for after he got accepted to the Boston Youth Tech Symposium last year. He placed them on gently, tapped the side twice, and let the soft, luffy beats fill his ears. Music without lyrics, just mood. He didn't want to think too hard. Still, thoughts came. Would Leon meet him at the airport? Would it be weird? Was this a step toward something real, or just a rich man easing guilt? His mother had always kept her words about Leon measured, never bitter, but honest. He's not a bad man. She had once told Elijah, he's just a man who made a choice. You don't owe him love, but if you want to know him, that's your choice now. Now the choice was unfolding at 30,000 feet. He closed his eyes, took a slow breath. Everything felt heavy and quiet and new. The crew made final checks, and passengers in economy began boarding in waves. Behind the curtain that separated the cabins, Elijah could hear the low murmur of movement, the unmistakable mix of travel stress and airport chatter. In contrast, first class remained still. Joan Alvarez, the woman in seat 1B, took out a paperback novel and began reading. Occasionally, she glanced sideways at Elijah, not in judgment, but in the natural curiosity of someone sharing space. Elijah didn't mind. He was used to being observed. The headphones kept his bubble intact. Until the moment he felt it, the shift in air. A pause. A wait. He opened one eye and saw her, the flight attendant. Different from the one who had smiled at him when he boarded. This one was older. Pale skin, blonde gray hair pinned into a severe bun, makeup applied with precision. Her name tag read Chloe. She was standing in the galley, watching him, not just in passing, not the usual check. Watching him, and just like that, the stillness in Elijah's world broke. He adjusted his headphones, pretending not to notice, but his body had already done the math. He knew that look, the one that asked silently, "Are you sure you're supposed to be here?" He had seen it in banks, in bookstores, in lobbies. He felt his stomach twist slightly. Not fear, not even anger, just preparation. Because sometimes, when you're young and black in first class, peace is temporary. Still, Elijah didn't flinch. He looked back at the window. The raindrops had stopped. The sky was clearing. Whatever was coming, he would meet it as he always did, head high, voice calm, truth on his side. Chloe Kessler had worked the skies for over 25 years. She wore her Navy uniform with precision, every button perfectly aligned, scarf knotted just right, and shoes polished until they gleamed. Her posture was stiff, her hair pulled into the same tight chignon every flight, and her lipstick never strayed beyond the lines. She believed in standards. Standards kept things from falling apart. And in her mind, she was the last line of defense between order and chaos. That was how she saw her job, not as service, not as hospitality, but as control. She didn't say it out loud. Of course. She had learned how to wear her beliefs behind polite smiles and practiced efficiency, but her eyes always gave her away. Now, standing in the galley of Solstice Air Flight 1827, Chloe's eyes were locked on Elijah Carter in seat 1A. There was nothing inherently wrong with what she saw. A young man, neatly dressed, headphones on, quietly minding his business. But something about the picture didn't sit right with her. She had no words for it. But the discomfort bloomed in her chest like a warning light. She had seen it before. A feeling, more than a fact. A kind of quiet doubt, born not from anything specific Elijah had done, but from everything he was not. He was not fidgeting. He was not nervous. He was not apologetic. He looked like he belonged there. And for Chloe, that alone made him suspicious. She turned from the galley and began to prep her beverage cart, trying to push the thought aside. There were real safety checks to complete, lavatory doors to lock, service briefings to finalize, the usual tasks that came before takeoff. Still, her mind looped back to seat 1A. Why hadn't the other attendants checked the manifest? Maybe someone had mixed up the seats. Or maybe the kid had wandered up from economy. She hadn't seen him board. She hadn't seen anyone verify his pass. And now her curiosity had taken root. In the aisle behind her, a voice broke the hum of routine. This is absurd. I was told there were upgrade options available. Chloe turned. A man in a wrinkled gray blazer stood by the galley, clutching a leather laptop bag in one hand and a smartphone in the other. His cheeks were flushed from exertion, and a sour expression twisted his mouth. "Sir," Chloe said with measured courtesy, "can I help you? I'm Byron Herrick. I was supposed to be on the upgrade list. My assistant assured me that with my loyalty status, I'd get bumped up. Instead, I'm in 8C. That's practically the cargo hold." Chloe forced a thin smile. She'd dealt with dozens of Byron Herricks in her life. Entitled, pushy, always using words like important meeting, elite status, or this is unacceptable. "I'm afraid first class is fully occupied today," she replied evenly. Byron craned his neck, peering down the aisle. "Is it because I see a seat up there?" he said, pointing discreetly toward 1A. "That one. That's available." "Isn't it?" Chloe hesitated. A subtle tension prickled at the back of her neck. "No. That seat is taken?" Byron narrowed his eyes, by who Chloe shifted slightly. "A young man. Traveling alone." Byron scoffed. "I see. Well, maybe there's been a mistake. I'm Platinum Sapphire. I think someone should double-check." And there it was. The permission Chloe hadn't admitted she was waiting for. She gave a tight nod. "I'll see what I can do." She smoothed the front of her blazer, tucked her tablet under one arm, and began the walk toward 1A. Each step felt like a slow drumbeat. She wasn't angry, not yet. But her mind was busy rearranging facts to support her instinct. A teenager, alone, first class, hoodie, headphones, no visible adult. Was he upgraded by accident? Did he switch seats? She had to know. She reached row 1. Elijah was still looking out the window, headphones on, completely unaware of the small storm about to touch down beside him. She tapped him on the shoulder, not gently, not rudely, but just hard enough to break the bubble. Elijah turned and looked up, pulling the headphones down around his neck. "Yes," he said calmly. Chloe smiled, but it was the kind of smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I need to see your boarding pass," she said. No hello, no reason, no smile of reassurance. Elijah blinked, confused. "Is there a problem? Just a routine check. Your boarding pass, please." He nodded slowly, unzipping his bag and retrieving the pass without fuss. He handed it over. She barely glanced at it. Chloe already had her answer. It didn't matter what the paper said. Something was off. Elijah Carter, seat 1A. she read aloud, as if testing it. Yes, Elijah said simply. Chloe handed the pass back. There might have been a mix-up. I believe that seat may have been assigned incorrectly. I'll need you to move to another seat in the main cabin. Elijah's eyebrows lifted slightly. Why, this is my seat. It was purchased for me. Her tone shifted. The system sometimes makes mistakes. It happens more often than people think. Elijah didn't respond right away. His heartbeat had picked up slightly, but his voice remained composed. With respect, I'm not moving. This seat was confirmed days ago. Chloe tilted her head. Young man, she said, her voice growing colder, you are not entitled to that seat. The words landed like a slap. The woman beside Elijah Joan Alvarez set down her book. Her fingers tightened around the armrest, her expression shifting from neutral to alert. Elijah straightened, jaw tightening. I'm sitting where I was told to sit, he said evenly. You are being non-compliant, Chloe snapped. No, Elijah replied. I'm being reasonable. If you think there's a mistake, please verify it with the manifest. Joan Alvarez cleared her throat. Excuse me, she said to Chloe. I've been sitting here the entire time. He hasn't done anything wrong. He's answered respectfully. You're creating unnecessary conflict. Chloe turned, her face tight. This doesn't concern you. It does when it involves harassment, Joan replied. Elijah glanced between them. Part of him wanted to disappear, but another part, the part his mother had raised, knew this moment mattered. Because if he stood up now, the story would become about how he didn't belong. And he did. So he stayed seated. I'm not going anywhere, he said quietly. Chloe's face flushed. You're making this difficult. She hissed, I'll need to inform the captain. And just like that, she spun on her heel and marched back down the aisle. Fury and righteousness burning in every step. Byron Herrick stood near the galley, pretending to scroll through emails, but clearly watching. Joan turned to Elijah. You handled that well, she said softly. Thanks, Elijah replied. But inside, his hands were trembling. He looked out the window again, trying to anchor himself. The sky was still cloudy, but the real storm had already begun. Captain Ronald Stokes didn't like to be interrupted before takeoff. He had a process, a routine, a mental checklist honed by 30 years of flying steel birds across the sky. His cockpit was a sanctuary of order, and he protected it with the kind of reverence a monk might give to sacred ground. So when the knock came on the door, just 15 minutes before pushback, he sighed. He looked at his co-pilot, who shrugged. Must be Chloe, the co-pilot muttered. She looked annoyed about something. Captain Stokes opened the door and leaned out. Chloe was standing there, clipboard pressed tight to her chest, lips pursed like she had been waiting her entire career for this moment. What's the issue? Stokes asked. I have a non-compliant passenger in seat 1A, she said flatly. He's refusing to move from a seat that was most likely misassigned. He's becoming combative. Stokes raised an eyebrow. Mistaken assignment. He presented a pass for the seat, she admitted, but I believe it was issued in error. He's a minor, traveling alone. It doesn't add up. The captain was already losing interest. These things happened. Computer errors, loyalty status upgrades gone wrong, people moving to open seats without asking. Usually a few stern words were enough. All right, he said with a tired sigh. Let's go have a look. Back in the cabin. Elias sat with his hands folded calmly in his lap, but inside, his nerves were crackling. Joan Alvarez remained seated beside him, her body angled subtly in his direction, ready to speak again if needed. Passengers in the rows ahead were peeking over shoulders. Whispers fluttered like soft turbulence. The woman across the aisle raised her phone as if checking email, but the camera was facing the wrong way. Chloe returned, a faint smirk on her face as Captain Stokes followed. The moment the captain arrived, the mood in the cabin shifted. Authority had arrived. He was tall, graying at the temples, and wore his epaulettes like armor. He didn't smile. "Son," the captain began, voice steady but edged. "I'm told there's an issue with your seat." "No issue, sir," Elijah replied respectfully. "I've shown my boarding pass. This is my seat." "He's correct," Joan added. "I saw it with my own eyes. There's been no wrongdoing on his part." The captain held up a hand to silence her. "Elijah, is it?" he said, glancing briefly at the boarding pass Chloe had now handed him. He frowned, reading it. "It says 1A. "Yes, sir," Elijah said. "And you're traveling alone?" "Yes. Do you often fly alone in first class?" The question hung there, dripping with implication. Elijah didn't answer right away, not because he didn't know what to say, but because he did. Too many things, all of them true. None of them would help. He chose the one that kept the peace. "This seat was booked for me," Chloe cut in. "Captain, I believe we should reassign him until we can confirm." "With respect," Joan interrupted. "You're punishing a passenger without cause." Stokes looked between them. The cabin was watching now. He could feel the weight of their eyes. He had seen situations like this spiral, and they always reflected badly on the crew, no matter who was at fault. Still, his instinct leaned toward backing his attendant. Chloe was seasoned, reliable, maybe a little high-strung, but not reckless. He leaned in toward Elijah. "We can do this the easy way," he said, voice low. "You can move to the other seat and we'll sort this out after takeoff. Or we can make it more complicated." Elijah's mouth felt dry. This wasn't about the seat anymore. It was about power. He glanced at Chloe, who stood with her arms folded, at Captain Stokes, who seemed more tired than angry, at Joan Alvarez, who looked at him like she was willing to stand with him if he stood for himself. Then he thought of his mother. He thought of the hospital room, her hand in his, her voice, hoarse but clear. "Don't ever let them convince you that you're lucky to be respected. That's your birthright." Elijah nodded once, slowly. "Before we go any further, sir, I'd like to make a phone call." Stokes blinked. "A phone call?" "Yes, just one. It won't take long." Chloe rolled her eyes. "To who? Your mom?" "No," Elijah said, quietly but firmly. "To my father." Chloe scoffed. "There are no calls allowed before takeoff." Elijah turned to the captain. "I believe it's within my right to make a call before being removed from a flight. I haven't violated any rule. I haven't disobeyed any lawful order. I'm requesting this call as a courtesy." Stokes hesitated. The logic was frustratingly sound. And something about the boy's tone made him pause. It was calm, measured, not entitled, not fearful. "Fine," he muttered. "Make it quick." Elijah reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He scrolled through his favorites. One name, Leon Carter. He pressed the button and lifted the phone to his ear. The plane was still connected to the airport Wi-Fi. It rang twice. Then a voice answered, "Elijah." It was deep, composed, laced with concern. "Hey, Dad," Elijah said. "Sorry to call like this. I'm on flight 1827, seat 1A. I'm being told to move by a flight attendant. I showed my boarding pass, but they're insisting I was placed here by mistake." Silence on the other end. Elijah continued, The captain's here. So is the flight attendant. They've threatened to remove me. I just wanted you to know what's happening." The voice on the line changed. Still calm, but colder. "Is the captain standing there?" "Yes." "Hand him the phone." Captain Stokes took a step back. "I'm not sure that's Elijah met his eyes. My father asked to speak with you." Reluctantly, the captain took the phone. "This is Captain Stokes," he said. There was no speaker mode, no recording, just a simple phone pressed to a seasoned pilot's ear. But whatever words came through that phone changed everything. Stokes straightened. His face went blank, then tight. His eyes darted to Chloe. Chloe took a step forward. "What is it?" she asked. The captain didn't answer. He held the phone out to her. "He wants to speak with you." Chloe frowned. "What he wants to speak? With you?" She took the phone, confused, and raised it to her ear. "This is Chloe, lead flight attendant," for she didn't finish the sentence. Whatever she heard was enough. Her face drained of color. Her lips parted slightly. She listened for several seconds. Then, without a word, she handed the phone back to the captain and stepped backward. Captain Stokes took the phone. "Yes, sir," he said into the receiver. "Understood." He hung up. He turned to the co-pilot. "Shut it down. We're not taking off." The cabin, already tense, seemed to hold its breath. "We're returning to the gate," the captain announced. His voice clipped. He didn't look at Elijah. He didn't need to. He had just realized who Elijah's father was, and it had changed everything. For the passengers of Solstice Air Flight 1821, the announcement was jarring. The captain's voice came over the intercom, formal but curt. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. Due to an unexpected internal issue, we are returning to the gate. We apologize for the delay. Please remain seated and keep your seatbelts fastened." There was a ripple of murmurs. Eyebrows raised. Cell phones were lifted. Faces turned toward one another in confusion. In seat 8C, Byron Herrick huffed dramatically and crossed his arms. "This is ridiculous," he muttered, loud enough for several nearby passengers to hear. "They're grounding a flight because of one brat in first class." He didn't realize how closely the woman in 9D was watching him, or that her phone camera had been recording since Chloe had stormed past her 10 minutes ago. Back in the first-class cabin, Chloe Kessler sat rigidly on the jump seat by the galley, staring straight ahead. Her hands were clasped in her lap, knuckles white. She had been in this position countless times, prepped for takeoff, mind on beverage service, snack choices, passenger requests. But this time, her mind was blank. No one had said a word to her since she hung up the phone. She didn't need anyone to. The voice of Leon Carter had left no room for misunderstanding. She hadn't been scolded. She had been terminated. Clearly, coldly, immediately. Her chest felt hollow. Her ears burned with shame. 25 years in the sky, and it had all come apart in one conversation. Not because she made a mistake. She'd made plenty of those. It was the nature of the job. No. This time, she had been caught doing something worse. Something she'd never have called prejudice out loud. But now she was replaying her own words in her head and hearing them differently. "Young man, you are not entitled to that seat." Entitled. That word echoed now, ugly and sharp. Across from her, Captain Ronald Stokes stood by the cockpit door, staring down the aisle as the aircraft taxied slowly back toward the gate. His jaw was locked tight. His thoughts were louder than the engines. He had let Chloe lead him into a situation he hadn't vetted, hadn't questioned, He'd assumed authority was on his side, assumed the boy was wrong. And now, the weight of that assumption was suffocating. He could feel the silence of the first-class cabin like a judgment. Elia sat quietly in 1A, headphones back on, not playing music, just blocking out the noise. His breathing was shallow, his heart still racing. He had won, but it didn't feel like victory. Joan Alvarez leaned toward him slightly. "You all right?" she asked softly. He pulled the headphones down to his neck. "I guess," he said. "I don't know." She nodded slowly. Her expression was filled with empathy. "They should have never put you through that." Elijah gave a faint, tired smile. "I'm used to it." Joan didn't answer, because she knew he meant it, and that was the worst part. 10 minutes later, the aircraft docked at the gate. The jet bridge reconnected with a subtle thud. The door hissed open. Waiting just outside was a man in a black suit, holding a slim tablet and flanked by 2 security agents. His badge read, "Miles Edmonds, VP of Operations, Solstice Air." Miles stepped on board with a kind of quiet purpose that silenced the whispers instantly. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't look around for direction. He already knew what he was there to do. He approached Captain Stokes first. "Captain," Miles said, nodding once, "you are dismissed from this flight. Please collect your things. HR will debrief you immediately." Stokes blinked. A flush crept into his neck. But he didn't argue. He only nodded stiffly and disappeared into the cockpit without another word. Miles turned toward the galley. "Ms. Kessler," he said. Chloe stood slowly. Her voice was a whisper. "There's nothing more to say." Miles interrupted. "You've already spoken to Mr. Carter. Please gather your personal belongings. You will be escorted out." Chloe looked around, as if hoping someone might defend her. No one met her gaze. Her legs wobbled slightly as she stepped past the curtain. She reached into the overhead bin and pulled out her neatly packed crew bag. For a moment, her hand lingered on the polished aluminum handle. Then she rolled it down the aisle, flanked by the security guards, walking past passengers who now openly stared. Some looked sympathetic. Most looked angry. A few pulled out phones. She kept her head down. In seat 8C, Byron Herrick sunk into his seat as if hoping to vanish. But Miles Edmonds was not done. "Mr. Herrick," he said, stopping beside him. Byron looked up, blinking. "Yes, please step into the galley with me." Byron followed reluctantly, confusion growing by the second. In the front of the plane, Miles stood once more before Elijah Carter. "Mr. Carter," he said gently, "on behalf of Solstice Air and your father, I offer our deepest apologies." Elijah nodded slowly. He didn't speak. "You've done nothing wrong," Miles continued. "We've canceled this flight to address what happened. All passengers will be rebooked. We've arranged a private car to take you to your destination or a hotel of your choice. I just want to go," Aaliyah said quietly. "Understood." Miles turned to Joan Alvarez. "And you, ma'am, thank you for speaking up. If you'd be willing, the company would like to formally recognize your actions today." Joan shook her head. "Don't need recognition," she said. "Just do better." "We intend to," Miles replied. Back in the galley, Byron was fidgeting, sweating. "I didn't do anything," he said quickly. "I just asked about an upgrade. You pointed out a seat and implied someone didn't belong in it," Miles said. "That implication was heard and acted on. I didn't mean you will be contacted by your employer shortly. They've already received the footage." Byron's jaw dropped. "What footage?" The one recorded by the passenger in 9D? You're free to deboard with the others. I was just... But Miles was already walking away. The captain, the flight attendant, and the instigator. 3 pieces removed in under 30 minutes. The fallout was only beginning. But inside seat 1A, Elijah remained silent, because for all the justice unfolding around him, a question still echoed in his chest. If my last name hadn't been Carter, would they have listened? Would anyone have believed me? That question stayed with him long after the cabin was cleared. The airport conference room was smaller than Ronald Stokes expected. It wasn't grand or intimidating, just 4 walls painted a dull gray, a long glass table, and chairs that creaked when you leaned too far back. A pitcher of untouched water sat in the center, next to a legal pad and a single pen. It felt less like a boardroom and more like a holding cell. Ronald sat alone. His captain's hat rested upside down on the table beside him. His arms were folded tightly across his chest, eyes fixed on the blank wall in front of him. He wasn't being detained. No one had handcuffed him. But the silence was damning. The absence of noise, of certainty, of control, gnawed at him. For the first time in decades, he felt like a passenger instead of the pilot. He had always seen himself as calm under pressure, a man of experience, a man who understood the stakes at 30,000 feet. But now, grounded, he found himself replaying every decision from the last few hours. The knock on the cockpit door, Chloe's complaint, the walk to 1A, the boy sitting calmly, the lawyer next to him, the flash of defiance in the young man's eyes, and then the name, Leon Carter, a name he had heard in every quarterly operations call, a name at the top of the org chart, a name he had never imagined would belong to a kid in a hoodie sitting in first class. When Elijah handed him that phone, Ronald's gut told him to refuse, to shut it all down, maintain control. But something in the boy's voice gave him pause. It wasn't anger. It wasn't arrogance. It was stillness. He had been through this before, and somehow, Ronald had become part of that cycle. He remembered taking the phone. He remembered hearing Leon's voice, and the words still rang in his ears. You looked at my son and decided he was a problem before he opened his mouth. You made that call in seconds, and now you'll sit with the consequences for years. Ronald shifted in his seat. The door opened without warning. Miles Edmonds stepped inside, flanked by a woman Ronald recognized from HR. She carried a folder in one hand and a neutral expression that felt heavier than any reprimand. Miles didn't sit. He simply closed the door behind him and walked to the head of the table. Captain Stokes, he began. Thank you for waiting. Ronald didn't respond. He just nodded once. We've reviewed the footage. Miles continued. Multiple passenger statements corroborate what we've seen, and I've spoken with Mr. Carter personally. Ronald exhaled slowly, and he asked, And you're being placed on administrative leave effective immediately, Miles said, pending a full internal investigation. Ronald looked at him, not with anger, not with protest, but with something closer to resignation. I made the call I thought was right in the moment, he said, voice low. You made a call without facts, Miles replied. And worse, you made it based on a bias you didn't stop to question. Ronald looked down at his hands. I back my crew. That's what we do. Miles' expression didn't change. There's a difference between backing your crew and blindly empowering discrimination. The HR rep opened the folder and began reviewing the steps. Counseling, suspension, possible recertification. A long list of boxes to be checked before a decision could be made about Ronald's future with Solstice. But Ronald wasn't listening anymore. He was remembering the look in Elijah's eyes. Not scared, not angry, just tired. A tiredness that had nothing to do with jet lag and everything to do with history repeating itself again. He had contributed to that. Maybe not deliberately, but that didn't matter. He had failed, and deep down, he knew it. Later that evening, in a hotel room across town, Elijah Carter lay on his side, staring at the ceiling. The lights were dimmed. A tray of untouched room service sat on the table. The television played softly in the background, muted. The headlines were already running. Teen wrongfully accused in first-class incident. Airline grounds flight. CEO's son at center of bias storm. His face was on screen. A photo pulled from his school's website. He looked smaller in that picture, younger. His smile was wider. Now it all felt so far away. He turned over and pulled the blankets tighter around him. He didn't feel safe. Not in this expensive suite. Not in this high-rise. Not even inside his own body. He thought of his mother. What would she have said if she saw him now? Would she be proud? Would she be scared? Would she be furious? He wanted to believe she would be all three. His phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text from Leon. "Can I call?" Elijah stared at it for a long moment. Then he typed back, "Okay." The call came through almost instantly. "Elijah," Leon said, his voice softer than before. "I just wanted to hear your voice. Are you all right?" Elijah didn't answer right away. "I'm not sure," he said finally. There was silence on the line. "I never wanted to put you in that position," Leon said. "I should have met you at the airport myself. I should have been there." "You weren't," Elijah said. The words weren't angry. They were just true. "I know." Another pause. "Your mother," Leon continued. "She would have handled this better than I did." "Probably," Elijah said. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," Leon added, "but I am asking for a chance to do better. Not just for the company. For you." Elijah stared at the ceiling again. "You've got a lot of people watching now," he said. "You think they care because I'm your son. But they care because it happened. To someone like me. And it keeps happening." Leon exhaled. "You're right. I'm not trying to be anyone's symbol," Elijah said. "I don't want you to be," Leon replied. "I just want you to be heard." There was a long pause before Elijah responded. "You can start by listening." "I am," Leon said. And for the first time, Elijah believed him. The call ended. The room fell quiet again. But something inside Elijah had shifted. This wasn't over. Not for him. Not for Solstice. Not for anyone who had ever been told to give up their seat because someone else looked more like they belonged. He rolled over and closed his eyes. Tomorrow would come. And when it did, he would be ready. The next morning came without fanfare. No sunlight streamed through the hotel curtains. No birds chirped on the window ledge. Just gray light and the low hum of traffic far below. Elijah Carter stood in the bathroom staring at his reflection in the mirror. His eyes were puffy. His jaw was tight. His hoodie hung on him like armor that hadn't quite held. He didn't feel like a boy. Not anymore. He splashed cold water on his face and dried it with a monogrammed towel. The hotel had spared no detail, but comfort wasn't something you could wrap around your shoulders like a robe. He still felt exposed. His phone lit up on the nightstand. "Joan Alvarez, the woman from seat 1B. He answered. "Hey," he said, voice quiet. "Elijah," she replied, sounding awake and steady. I hope it's okay I called. I got your number from Miles. Yeah, it's okay. I just wanted to say again that I'm proud of how you handled yourself yesterday, and that you weren't alone. Thank you, he said, sitting on the edge of the bed. I know this probably feels overwhelming, she continued, but what you did, staying calm, holding your ground, that's not easy, especially not at your age, especially not in that situation. I didn't really do anything, Elijah said. I just didn't move. Exactly, she said. Sometimes, not moving is the most powerful thing we can do. He let those words settle. Are they calling you to testify, or something, he asked. There's no courtroom, Joan replied. But yes, there are meetings, internal reviews, legal briefings. Apparently, Solstice is taking this very seriously. Good. Elijah, she added, her tone shifting. Leon's asked for a meeting with me and a few others. He wants to hear directly from the people who were there. He's not sending PR. He's showing up in person. Elijah was quiet. I just thought you should know, she added. He's trying. Trying isn't enough, Elijah said softly. I agree, but it's a start. He thanked her again, ended the call, and looked out the window. The city outside was beginning to wake. Cars crawled along the freeway like slow blood through veins. In the sky above, planes soared unnoticed, the way they always had. He wondered how many of them had someone like him in 1A, and how many had someone like Chloe deciding who belonged. A knock at the hotel door pulled him from the window. It was Miles Edmonds, dressed in a clean gray suit, clipboard in hand, his demeanor calm but alert. Elijah, he said with a respectful nod. May I come in? Elijah stepped back and let him enter. Miles stood just inside the room, not taking a seat, not moving too close. We've been instructed to offer you several options for how to proceed today, he said. You can return home on a private charter. You can stay here for as long as you'd like. All expenses covered. Or, if you're open to it, your father would like to see you. He's in the city. Elijah looked at him. You mean Leon? Miles nodded. Yes. Elijah considered that for a long moment. Then he asked, did he approve of firing Chloe? Miles's face stayed neutral. It wasn't about approval. It was about accountability. Did he know what she said to me? How she looked at me? He saw the footage, and he heard the phone call. Elijah thought of her voice, sharp and impatient. The way she had stared at him like a misplaced object. All right, Elijah said. I'll see him. 2 hours later. Elijah sat in the corner of a quiet executive lounge on the top floor of Solstice Air's regional headquarters. The space was sleek and minimalist, glass walls, gray floors, a long wooden table with chrome fixtures and sound-absorbing panels that made every movement feel private. There were no other passengers, no coffee cups clinking, just a quiet that stretched. Then the door opened, and Leon Carter walked in. He wore a dark navy suit and a charcoal tie. His beard was trimmed, his posture commanding. But there was something in his eyes that had changed. He didn't carry the same cool detachment Elijah remembered from childhood visits. He looked human now. He approached slowly and extended his hand. Elijah, he said. Elijah stood but didn't take the hand. Instead, he looked him in the eye and said, You called me your son yesterday, on that phone call, in front of your crew. Leon lowered his hand. I did. You haven't done that in a long time. Leon nodded once, quietly. I've done a lot of things wrong, he said, and I'm not here to fix all of them in one conversation. Elijah sat down. Leon joined him. You were right to call me, Leon said. I should have been there. I should have never put you in a situation where your dignity depended on my name." Elijah folded his arms. "Would they have listened if I wasn't your son?" Leon didn't answer immediately. "I honestly don't know," he said. "But I know they listened because of what you said, not because of who I am." "That's not true." Leon looked at him. "But it can be," he said. "That's what I want to build now. A system that listens to people because it's the right thing to do, not because they know someone in power." Elijah stared at him for a long time. "Then show me." "I will," Leon replied. "I want to be part of it," Elijah said. "But on my terms. I don't want my face on some brochure. I want to make something real." Leon's eyes softened. "What do you have in mind?" Elijah reached into his bag and pulled out a small notebook. Inside were sketches, diagrams, notes. "I've been working on a concept," he said. "An internal bias detection system. It's based on communication audits, language flags, behavior patterns. It could help you catch things before they escalate." Leon listened carefully, leaning forward. "This is incredible," he said. "It's a start," Elijah replied. Leon nodded. "You start building this," he said, "and I'll make sure it becomes part of the Solstice standard." Elijah looked down at the notebook in his hands. He had come here expecting to walk away. Instead, he was about to build something that could outlast all of them. Maybe that was how healing began, not in apologies, but in action. Chloe Kessler hadn't touched her phone since the call with Leon Carter. It sat face down on the chipped nightstand of the small hotel where Solstice had dropped her after escorting her from the aircraft. Not the crew hotel she had booked for the layover, not the comfortable downtown suites she had grown used to. This one had buzzing fluorescent lights, a bathroom fan that groaned like it hated being useful, and a front desk clerk who didn't make eye contact when she checked in. She hadn't slept much. Her uniform still hung on the closet handle. Neat, as always. Her bag was by the door, zipped and untouched. She sat on the edge of the bed with her hands folded in her lap, staring at nothing in particular. She kept replaying it, not just the phone call, the moments before, the way she had looked at Elijah Carter, the way she had spoken to him. She hadn't shouted, hadn't cursed. She had used policy words, procedure tone. But now, stripped of her role, stripped of the badge, she saw it for what it was. It hadn't been professionalism. It had been dismissal, condescension, prejudice she had wrapped in politeness. She thought of all the flights before, all the time she had made snap decisions, who to give the last business upgrade to, who looked too casual to be where they were, who got the extra snack box, whose complaint got addressed first. She had always thought she was being efficient, intuitive. Now, she wondered if she had simply been biased. Her phone buzzed again. She ignored it. She didn't want to read the headlines, didn't want to see her name trending for the wrong reasons, didn't want to watch the moment where her voice sharpened and her words betrayed everything she thought she believed about herself. She thought she was fair. She thought she was just doing her job. But jobs don't protect you from judgment, not when you fail at the most human level. There was a knock on the door. She rose, walked to it slowly, and opened it. A man in a dark blue suit stood there. His face was unreadable, clipboard tucked under his arm. "Chloe Kessler," he asked. She nodded. "I'm with Solstice Corporate Security." He said, "I'm here to escort you to the HR facility for your final exit briefing." She didn't speak, just stepped back to grab her bag. The walk through the lobby felt surreal. People passed her with polite indifference. No one recognized her here. Not yet. but she could feel it coming. The digital scarlet letter, the video still circulating, the permanent tag of being the flight attendant who had tried to eject a boy from first class. And not just any boy. Elijah Carter, the CEO's son, the boy who had stayed calm while she unraveled. She climbed into the black sedan, waiting at the curb, and sat in silence as the car pulled away. Elsewhere, in a high-rise office with panoramic windows overlooking Seattle's skyline, Leon Carter stood before a team of his top executives. The conference room was silent as a screen displayed the video of Chloe's interaction with Elijah, captured from 3 angles. There were no gasps, no debate. The footage spoke for itself. Leon didn't yell. He didn't slam the table. He just asked one question. How many other Elijahs have we failed who didn't have my last name? No one answered. He turned to the head of human resources, a woman named Danny Phillips. I want a review of all discrimination complaints from the last 5 years. I want anonymized surveys from all ground staff and flight crews within the week. And I want to know how this culture grew underneath our policies. Donna nodded. She was already taking notes. This is not a PR issue, Leon continued. This is a rot issue, and we are going to dig it out. Fully, in a training center 2 floors below. Captain Ronald Stokes sat in the back row of a classroom meant for newly promoted first officers. He was not required to be there. Not yet, but he had asked to observe. On the projector screen, a young black woman in a Solstice blazer presented a module titled Unconscious Patterns of Authority. She wasn't lecturing. She was telling a story about her father, a man who was denied an upgrade not because he didn't qualify, but because he didn't fit the expected image of someone who did. Stokes listened, jaw tight, fingers curled around his travel mug. He wasn't sure yet if redemption was real, but he was beginning to understand that reflection was the first step. Back at the operations wing, Elijah Carter sat in a meeting room beside Joan Alvarez. Across from them, a team of Solstice's lead developers and cultural training designers had just finished walking through the first draft of the Solstice Standard. It was a bold document, clear, unapologetic. It didn't suggest better behavior. It demanded it. Joan flipped through the pages and nodded. This is good, she said. It's not enough, Elijah added. Not yet. The lead developer, a man named Shane, looked up. What's missing? Lived experience, Elijah replied. Not just mine. Everyone's. I want real voices embedded in the training, videos, narratives, not scripted actors. Real people. We can do that, Shane said, but it will take time. Elijah closed his notebook, then take the time. When the meeting ended, Joan turned to Elijah. You really going to stay with this? She asked. He looked out the glass wall, down at the runway beyond. They took something from me, he said. The moment I was told to get up, the moment I realized they weren't seeing me, just a problem in their seat. He looked back at her. I want to make sure no one else has to carry that weight. She smiled, not out of pity, but out of respect. You're already doing it. Outside, a new flight taxied into place, a plane full of stories no one had heard yet. And maybe now, someone was finally listening. By the time the media storm had quieted, Elijah Carter was back in school. He walked the same hallways he had walked the week before, wore the same hoodie, carried the same books, but nothing felt quite the same. Some students stared at him a little longer now. Some whispered. A few offered a quiet thumbs up as he passed. Teachers looked at him with new eyes, some with pride, some with pity, and some Elijah couldn't quite read. But the attention wasn't what stayed with him. What stayed was the silence, in the moments before everything had changed. The moment on that plane, when no one had spoken up except for one woman, Joan Alvarez. Her voice had pierced the haze. It had anchored him, and now Elijah was beginning to find his own. In between classes, he kept a small notebook in his backpack, the same one he had shown Leon in the lounge. It was now filled with diagrams, flowcharts, real passenger testimonies, and concepts he and Shane had drafted together. Every note was another step toward something bigger than himself. That afternoon, he met Joan outside her law office, tucked into the corner of a downtown building near the waterfront. It was a modest space worn hardwood floors, the scent of old books, and framed quotes lining the walls. Not flashy, not corporate, but grounded. "You're early," she said, unlocking the door. "Couldn't stay still," Elijah replied, stepping inside. She gestured toward a worn brown couch near the window. "Have a seat." "I made coffee." "I don't drink coffee." "I know. That's why I brought hot chocolate." They sat together, watching the ferry boats in the distance. There was something deeply calming about the slowness of the water compared to the speed of everything that had happened. "I've been thinking," Elijah said, "about what happens after justice." Joan looked at him, intrigued. "We talk so much about getting justice, calling people out, exposing systems, and that matters. But after that, what comes next?" "What fills the space restoration?" Joan said. "Accountability is the spark. But change, that's the fire." Elijah nodded slowly. "I want to build something that outlives headlines, a platform, a program, a system that listens before damage is done." "You're already laying the groundwork," she said, "and you're not alone." A pause hung in the air before Elijah added, "Do you ever wonder if people only listen to me now because of who my father is?" "Yes," Joan said honestly. "Some do, but that's not what keeps them listening. It's not your last name. It's your voice, the way you held yourself, the way you're not interested in revenge. Just progress." He looked down at the steam curling from his cup. "I still have moments," he said quietly, "where I second-guess everything, where I wonder if I made it worse, if maybe I should have just moved. That thought will visit you sometimes," she said, "but don't give it a key. Don't let it stay." They sat in silence for a while, the kind that didn't demand filling. Back at Solstice HQ, Leon Carter was walking into a room he never imagined entering again. The Training and Culture Lab. It was a space he had approved years ago without ever visiting. A state-of-the-art facility designed to teach empathy, de-escalation, and bias awareness to Solstice staff. But over the years, it had fallen into a checkbox procedural formality in the onboarding process. Now it would become the nucleus of their transformation. Standing at the head of the lab was Dana Phillips, the head of HR, flanked by Shane and a newly hired advisor, Camille Price, a former social justice educator who had spent years designing conflict resolution programs in schools and government spaces. "Welcome," Camille said, offering Leon a warm but pointed smile. "I hear you're here to listen," she added. Leon nodded. "That's what I'm here for." "Good," Camille said, "because we're not going to sugarcoat this." She clicked a remote, and the screen behind her lit up. Passenger complaints, flight attendant reviews, ground crew testimonies, all anonymized, all raw. A list of moments Solstice had failed people, not just Elijah, and not just passengers. Some were subtle. A wheelchair user asked to wait longer for boarding with no explanation. A hijabi woman told she couldn't bring her personal prayer beads in her carry-on. A Filipino gate agent routinely assigned to baggage duties over newer white colleagues. Leon read through each line in silence. He didn't flinch, because he knew he couldn't look away anymore. Camille spoke again. "If you're serious about change, Mr. Carter, it's going to be uncomfortable and expensive and public." Leon looked at her, steady. "Let's get started." Meanwhile, Chloe Kessler sat across from a counselor in a quiet office with pale green walls. She wasn't there by obligation. She had called herself. The counselor was a black woman named Dr. Miriam Hart, soft-spoken, direct, and never once letting her look away from the truth. "I need to understand," Chloe said, "how I got there, how someone who believed she was fair wasn't." "That's a good place to start," Dr. Hart said. "But the goal isn't to find the moment you became biased. The goal is to trace the system that told you it was acceptable." Chloe sat with that. "I want to be better," she said. "Then you'll need to unlearn," Dr. Hart replied. "Unlearn more than you realize." Chloe nodded. Her hands trembled slightly, but she didn't hide them. She was here to face herself, not defend herself. Across the city. Elijah returned home that evening to find his father in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, chopping onions like it was a normal Tuesday. "You're cooking?" Elijah asked, surprised. Leon smiled faintly. "I figured it was time I stopped hiding behind boardrooms." They sat down to a quiet dinner. No grand speeches. No big talk about next steps. Just two people sharing a meal they both knew was long overdue. After dinner, Leon reached into a folder and pulled out a document. "This came from Camille," he said. "She wants you on the advisory panel." Elijah raised an eyebrow. "As a student, as a witness," Leon replied. "Someone who lived it. Someone who can help shape what safety should feel like on our flights." Elijah looked at the form, then back at his father. "I'll do it," he said, "but only if I get to speak the truth, even when it's hard." Leon nodded. "That's exactly why she asked for you." In the stillness that followed, Elijah stood and walked to the window. The moon hung low over the city. The sky was clear, and for the first time since that flight, he felt like maybe he could breathe without bracing for turbulence. 3 weeks later, Solstice Air announced the launch of a groundbreaking initiative that rippled across the industry. It wasn't just a press release. It was a promise, a commitment to unlearning, rebuilding, and elevating voices that had long been ignored or silenced. The name of the initiative was simple: Project Gate A1, a quiet nod to where Elijah Carter had first been humiliated and then held his ground. But behind that name was a system, a living one, built not just from policies and tech, but from human stories, hard conversations, and young voices that refused to be sidelined. At the center of it all sat Elijah, in a conference room lined with glass, his notebook now transformed into a user dashboard interface. Across from him were Shane Myers and Camille Price, reviewing the final integration tests before the pilot program launched across 6 major Solstice hubs. "Run it again," Elijah said. Shane tapped a few keys. The system, now called Vox, lit up on the screen. It wasn't just an app. It was a sensory database, a platform that analyzed crew interactions through anonymized audio, tracked repetitive patterns of escalation, and flagged moments where passengers were treated with unwarranted suspicion. Camille watched quietly, her arms crossed. "You know this is going to rattle people," she said. "Good," Elijah replied. "Let them be rattled." Camille smiled. "You've got that fire," she said. "But remember, change is less about heat and more about persistence." He nodded. "I'm not trying to burn it all down. Just make sure people stop pretending nothing's broken. From behind the glass, Dana Phillips joined them. She carried a file filled with the first anonymized test cases flagged by Vox. Dozens of moments. Moments that never made headlines but shaped the passenger experience every day. A mother with a child in a hijab pulled aside during boarding with no explanation. A man in a wheelchair asked to prove he could use the lavatory unassisted. A young woman whose name was mispronounced on every intercom call despite correction. These weren't explosions. They were paper cuts, but enough of them stacked, and they became a bleed. Dana set the file down. Corporate's nervous, she admitted. The unions want guarantees. The legal team wants oversight. And what do you want? Elijah asked. I want this to live, she said, but it has to be honest. It can't become another performance. He met her eyes. It won't be. Meanwhile, Chloe Kessler stood at the door of a community center 2 blocks from her apartment. She had spent the last few weeks doing something she had never done before, volunteering in spaces where she wasn't the authority. She sat in circles with people who looked nothing like her, listened to stories that made her uncomfortable, and this time, she didn't correct, didn't defend. She just listened. Inside, a group of high school students were sharing testimonies, not just about flights, but about schools, stores, sidewalks, places where their presence was challenged or questioned simply for existing. Chloe stayed in the back, taking notes, not because she planned to speak, but because she had promised Dr. Hart she would start collecting the moments that made her uncomfortable. A journal of unlearning, she called it, and today's entry was clear. I once believed kindness was enough to cover bias. It isn't. Kindness without awareness can still cause harm. Today, I begin choosing awareness, even when it's painful. Back at Solstice HQ, Leon Carter was preparing for a different kind of flight. This one wasn't on a manifest. He was boarding a test run of the new first-class experience, one shaped by months of data, empathy interviews, and design led by Camille's team. The cabin looked the same, but it felt different. Language was reframed, seating protocols revised. Even the crew uniforms had shifted slightly less military, more approachable. He didn't need to be there, but he wanted to feel it for himself. As the plane climbed into the sky, Leon looked out the window. For years, he had built this company with efficiency at the center, but now he realized something deeper. Efficiency without dignity was just speed. It wasn't progress. Across the aisle, a young black boy in 2A leaned back in his seat, headphones in, eyes closed. Leon watched him for a moment and saw a reflection of Elijah, not just in skin, but in presence, and this time, no one asked him for proof he belonged. Later that week, Elijah stood in front of a room full of Solstice employees, crew members, gate agents, flight attendants, and pilots. The company had invited him to speak, not as a guest, but as a partner. He wore a simple blue button-down and jeans. No suit, no badge, just himself. When that flight attendant told me to move, he began. It wasn't the first time I'd been made to feel like I didn't belong. It probably won't be the last. The room was still, but that moment, that pause I gave her, that choice not to get up, it wasn't about defiance. It was about dignity, mine, and yours. He paced slowly, his voice calm but clear. Every time we let assumptions lead us, we add weight to the shoulders of someone who's already carrying too much. So we built Vox not to punish, but to reflect, to catch the pattern before it hardens in policy, and to remind each other that respect should never be earned. It should be given. He paused. No one gets to decide who belongs based on appearance, accent, or age. We all belong the moment we walk through that gate." The room erupted into applause, not loud, but long. Some stood, some wiped away tears. Many just sat still, letting the words settle. That evening, Joan Alvarez called Elijah from her office. "I watched your speech," she said. "How did I do?" "You didn't perform," she replied. "You connected." He smiled, sitting on his bedroom floor, laptop open beside him, Vox dashboards flickering in the background. "Think they'll listen? Some already are," she said. "And the rest, they will." Outside, a plane streaked across the sky, its lights blinking quietly against the dark. And in that moment, for the first time since Flight 1827, Elijah didn't flinch at the sound of a jet overhead. He smiled instead, not because the storm was over, but because now they had a map. And this time, he was helping draw the flight plan. Solstice Air's transformation was gaining attention. Headlines called it bold, overdue, even revolutionary. Other airlines began watching closely. A few reached out to Solstice executives to learn more. But inside the company itself, the atmosphere was more complicated. Change was never simple. In training rooms and break areas, the conversations were quieter, more guarded. Crew members who had been with Solstice for decades whispered about how things were moving too fast. Some resented the scrutiny, the new accountability. Others were simply unsure how to adjust. Not everyone was ready. Captain Ronald Stokes knew this firsthand. He had flown with Solstice for 18 years. His voice had once carried unquestioned weight in the cockpit. Now, it carried something else. Hesitation, reflection. He stood in the crew lounge before his next flight, reading a memo pinned to the bulletin board. Mandatory Vox training for all flight captains. No exceptions. A younger co-pilot named Dana Lee glanced over his shoulder. "You heading in?" she asked. Stokes nodded. "Soon as we land." "You nervous?" He chuckled. "More than I was for my first solo flight." Dana smiled but said nothing. They both knew what he meant. Later that day, in a training session designed by Camille's team, Stokes sat at a table with 5 other crew members. A facilitator named Theo, a black man with a calm voice and sharp eyes, opened with a simple question. "When was the last time you made an assumption in the air at first?" No one answered. Then a flight attendant across the table spoke. "I assumed a guy in sweats was headed to the back. He was in 2C. Another chimed in. "I assumed a Latina mom didn't speak English. She did. Fluently." Stokes felt something stir in his chest. He didn't speak, but he didn't leave either. Later that night, back at his hotel, he pulled out his logbook and made a new kind of entry. "I've always trusted my instincts. Today I learned that instincts shaped by comfort zones can become blind spots. I have some work to do." Back at Solstice headquarters, Vox was starting to show results. The dashboard lit up with anonymized red flags and subtle prompts. Early data showed a measurable decrease in passenger complaints in Vox-tested flights. Not just fewer escalations, but more positive feedback about feeling seen, heard, respected. Elijah read the report in silence, his fingers tracing the graph as it curved upward. Shane stood beside him. "We're rolling it out in 3 more cities next month." "That fast?" Elijah asked. Shane grinned. "Corporate doesn't want to fall behind their own promise. And I think they're starting to believe in it." Elijah nodded, but his expression stayed serious. "We still haven't heard back from the National Crew Alliance," he said. "They're pushing back. Hard. They say it's surveillance. They say that because they're afraid of what it might show." Elijah replied, "Not because it's wrong." Meanwhile, Chloe Kessler had completed her unlearning journal. It sat full now 60 pages of reflections, admissions, and slow, painful awareness. She had brought it to Dr. Miriam Hart's office for their final session. "I used to think of racism as something loud," Chloe said, "obvious, ugly. And now, Doctor," Hart asked gently, "now I know it can wear a smile, a uniform, even a compliment. I used to think if I didn't mean harm, I hadn't caused it. But I did, and that matters." Dr. Hart closed her notebook. "Awareness isn't the end," she said. "It's the door." Chloe looked up. "I want to walk through it." She did. With Joan Alvarez's help, Chloe was quietly brought into the early phases of a new Solstice Initiative crew ambassadors, staff who had gone through intensive training and reflection, then used their experience to help others do the same. She wasn't there to teach. She was there to listen. In one of her first sessions, she sat across from a veteran gate agent who had recently received his first Vox flag. "I'm not racist," he said flatly. "I don't think you are," Chloe replied. "But the question isn't, are you racist? It's, are your decisions causing harm?" He shifted uncomfortably. I didn't know her background. I just made a judgment call. And now he was silent. Then finally, "I see how much that judgment cost her." Chloe nodded. "That's the work. Seeing the cost." Elsewhere, Joan met with Leon Carter in a quiet office overlooking the tarmac. The media was already calling Solstice the most reform-driven airline in the country. But she knew the work was far from over. "You're getting praise," she said. "But that praise can become complacency. Fast." "I know," Leon replied. "We're not done." "I want to propose a third-party board," Joan said. "Outside experts, community voices, no one on payroll." Leon leaned back. Unfiltered oversight. "Exactly. Because systems protect themselves. Unless we make sure they can't." He smiled. "You're relentless." She returned the smile. "That's why you called me." He nodded. "I'll draft the charter tomorrow." Back at home, Elijah sat in his room, the glow of his laptop casting light on his face. He was writing a blog entry for the Vox Development Journal. This one wasn't technical. It was personal. He titled it, "When Belonging is a Battle." I didn't expect to change an airline. I just wanted to fly without being told I didn't look like I belonged. I stayed in my seat because my existence isn't a disruption. It's presence. It's proof. Not of status, but of dignity. If Vox does one thing, I hope it reminds people that no one should have to earn their humanity. It should be given. The blog post went viral in a matter of hours, not because it was flashy, but because it was true. And truth has a way of traveling farther than any plane. The morning sun poured through the glass panels of Solstice Air's new cultural training center. The space had once been a forgotten annex near the tarmac, a place used mostly for equipment storage and overflow meetings. Now it was alive with purpose. Light filled the space. Artwork from passengers, flight crews, and communities lined the walls. Portraits, quotes, candid images from travels around the world. It felt human. It felt intentional. Elijah Carter stood at the center of the room, surrounded by a circle of folding chairs. He wasn't here for a ribbon-cutting ceremony or a staged speech. He was here for something quieter and much more sacred listening. Seated around him were 12 people, flight attendants, pilots, baggage handlers, maintenance staff. All of them had experienced incidents where the culture of the airline had failed them or someone they witnessed. All of them had also completed the new Vox integration training. Today was their chance to speak without filters. A woman with salt and pepper hair, her Solstice badge clipped to a windbreaker, spoke first. "I've worked here 22 years. I've watched new policies come and go. Most of them made us faster, more efficient. But this what we're doing now. This is the first time it feels like we're being asked to be better humans, not just better employees." A younger man chimed in, voice soft. "I used to think staying quiet was the same as staying neutral. But I realize now silence is a kind of choice too. And I'm done making that choice." Elias sat back, letting their words ripple through the circle. He didn't need to lead. He just needed to hold the space. Across the city, Leon Carter stood on the tarmac, just outside Hangar 17. It was an older maintenance facility set for renovation. His executive assistant handed him a white hard hat with the Solstice logo embossed in gold. "Press is on the way," she said. "You'll be joined by the mayor and the Secretary of Transportation." Leon nodded absently, but his mind was elsewhere. He looked toward the sky, where a plane lifted off, tilting upward against the blue. And just beyond that, on a parallel runway, another aircraft touched down, its wheels meeting Earth with quiet precision. Departures and arrivals. That's what the day had become. What was leaving? What was just arriving? He thought about his son, about Elijah's calm in the face of being humiliated, about his refusal to demand retribution and his insistence instead on building something better. A quiet pride settled in his chest. A few minutes later, reporters gathered under the pop-up tent near the hangar doors. The press conference was brief. Leon outlined the expansion of the cultural training program, now mandatory for all Solstice personnel, including corporate leadership. He introduced the new third-party oversight board, chaired by Joan Alvarez, with quarterly public reports. And then, without fanfare, he made an announcement that hadn't been shared with anyone yet, not even his communications team. "We are also renaming this facility. From today forward, it will be called the Elijah Carter Aviation Ethics Center, not to honor a name, but to honor a moment that asked us to decide who we really are." A hush fell over the crowd. Cameras clicked. Someone in the back began clapping. Others joined, slowly, not because they were told to, but because it felt right. Across town. Chloe Kessler was walking through the boarding gate of her first flight since the incident. Not as lead crew, not even as cabin staff, as a passenger. A part of her was nervous. She expected looks, whispered recognition, but instead, she was met with calm professionalism. A young black flight attendant scanned her boarding pass and offered a warm smile. "Welcome aboard, Ms. Kessler. Hope you enjoy your flight." Chloe blinked, startled, then nodded. "Thank you." She took her seat and looked out the window. As the engines rumbled and the plane began taxiing, she let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. She wasn't running from what happened, but she wasn't frozen in it anymore. At cruising altitude, she opened her tablet and began reviewing a draft curriculum for empathy-based de-escalation. Her name was now listed as a peer contributor. Across the aisle, a little girl with braids and bright eyes held her mother's hand and stared at the clouds. Her excitement was unfiltered, her joy undisturbed. And for the first time in months, Chloe allowed herself to smile. Elsewhere, in a video editing suite near Solstice's media department, Elia sat with Camille Price and Shane Myers. They were reviewing the final cut of a training film titled "Belonging Isn't Luxury." It began not with corporate statements or technical briefings, but with voices, real passengers. A Sikh man describing how he'd been questioned 3 times for the same seat. A teenage girl explaining how her body language was constantly interpreted as a threat. a trans woman recounting a moment when a flight attendant refused to speak to her directly. Each voice carried weight, not because they were loud, but because they were real. At the end of the video, Elia's voice came in softly, recorded in one of their early meetings. If we want skies to be open, they have to be just. If we want flying to be freedom, then first, we have to make sure everyone gets to feel safe at 30,000 feet. Camille leaned back in her chair. "It's ready," she said. Elijah nodded, then whispered, more to himself than to them. "It's just the beginning." That evening, Elijah and Leon met for dinner at a small bistro tucked away from the main streets. No interviews, no security team, just father and son. They ate quietly for a while, savoring the rare moment of calm. Then Leon reached into his coat pocket and handed Elijah a folded envelope. "What's this?" Elijah asked. "A letter from a former passenger. Someone who watched what happened. She wanted you to have it." Elijah opened it slowly. Inside was a handwritten note, neat cursive, soft ink. "Dear Elijah, I was in row 14 on flight 1827. I didn't speak up when you were asked to move. I sat still and let it happen. I've regretted that silence every day. But because of you, I found my voice again. Thank you for staying seated, for all of us." Elijah folded the note and held it in his lap for a long time. Neither of them said anything. They didn't need to. The silence said enough. The silence, finally, was not empty. It was healing. The plane ascended slowly through the mist over Seattle, its wings cutting a calm, determined path through the morning sky. Elijah Carter sat by the window in seat 2A, the same seat number where his life had shifted months ago. This time, no one questioned him. No one looked twice. He carried no paperwork, no explanation, no defenses, only presence. Across from him, Joan Alvarez sipped tea, reviewing briefing notes on her tablet. They were en route to Washington, D.C., to testify before the Federal Aviation Commission. For the first time, passenger dignity and systemic bias in commercial aviation would be discussed not just in editorial columns or think pieces, but as matters of federal oversight. Elijah glanced out the window. 30,000 feet. Somehow, this altitude felt different, not because of the height, but because of the clarity. He remembered sitting silently in the terminal that day, before Flight 1827. The weight, the confusion, the restraint. He remembered the flight attendant's eyes, cold with assumption, the way she had reached for authority like a reflex, the way silence from other passengers had deepened the pain. But now, the silence no longer echoed. It rested. It was replaced by voices, thousands of them, people who had written, spoken, marched, coded, recorded, and reformed. People who had believed him, not because he yelled, but because he stayed seated. He turned to Joan. "Do you think they'll listen?" She smiled without looking up. "Some won't. Some will pretend to. But there are always a few in every room who are just waiting for permission to believe something better is possible. You speak for them." He nodded, not out of confidence, out of readiness. 2 rows back, Leon Carter sat with Camille Price and Shane Myers. Shane was reviewing Vox's newest data sets, showing measurable, sustained reductions in customer escalations. The system was now being adopted as a trial program by 3 other airlines. It was no longer just Solstice's innovation. It was becoming the industry's mirror. Camille leaned toward Leon. "Remember when you asked me if this would be worth it?" Leon smirked. "I remember asking a lot of hard questions." She tapped the folder in front of them. These numbers don't lie, but they also don't tell the full story. Leon raised an eyebrow. She added, "The full story is that we have fewer complaints not because people stopped caring, but because they started feeling seen." That doesn't fit neatly on a bar graph. Shane glanced up from his screen. It doesn't need to. It lives in the flight logs, the employee journals, the calls that never had to be made. Leon looked out the window, then back at his son sitting at the front of the cabin, all because he refused to move. He whispered. Meanwhile, at Solstice's Cultural Training Center back in Seattle, Chloe Kessler stood in front of a new group of hires, her 5th cohort. She now worked part-time as a peer facilitator while continuing her flight shifts under direct mentorship. Not punishment, transformation. The young recruits stared at her with a mix of reverence and curiosity. Most knew who she was, knew the story, knew the shame, and now they saw the continuation. She started her session the same way every time. Before I teach you anything, I need to tell you who I was before I learned to see. She told them the truth about the moment on Flight 1827, about the instinct that had felt normal but had actually been a wound passed down, about the silence that followed her for weeks, and then about the choice to face herself, to stay, to change. The room always fell quiet when she finished. Today was no different. A young man raised his hand gently. "What made you decide to come back?" Chloe smiled, soft and clear. "Because when you break something, the easiest thing to do is leave. The bravest thing is to return and become part of the fix." She looked around the room. "I'm not here to ask for your perfection. I'm asking for your presence. If you can show up with your eyes and heart open, the rest follows." At 30,000 feet, the captain came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be landing in Washington shortly. Weather's clear. Winds are calm. Thanks for flying with us." Elijah closed his notebook. Not the same one from months ago. A new one. This one was thinner, lighter. Only a few pages had been filled. It wasn't about plans anymore. It was about reflection. He wrote a single sentence. "Every seat has a story. Make sure yours doesn't erase someone else's." As they began their descent, Joan turned to him, ready to walk into the room. "No," he said honestly, "but I'm going to anyway." She laughed. That's what readiness actually looks like. Back on the ground, cameras waited at the arrival gate. Not many, just a few news crews and congressional aides. A small crowd, but their presence marked a shift in tone. What once would have been a quiet hearing in a buried committee room now held national attention. As Elijah stepped through the jet bridge, he glanced over his shoulder. No one followed him. No one guarded him. But he wasn't alone. He had brought something with him. A moment. A truth. A choice. And as he approached the hearing room that afternoon, sitting behind a nameplate that simply read, "Elijah Carter, passenger," he didn't rehearse. He didn't need to. The truth was in his lived experience, in the system they had built, in the lives already changed. The room quieted as he leaned into the mic. He paused, then spoke clearly. "I'm not here today because I want revenge. I'm here because I want fairness. I want a future where no black teenager has to carry proof they belong. I want systems to see us before they judge us. I want flying to feel like freedom, not inspection. I want what anyone would want, dignity in the sky." Behind him, Joan rested her hands together. Leon looked on, eyes glassed but proud. And in that moment, high above policy and procedure, a quiet truth took flight. It started in seat 2A, but it would never land. Thank you for witnessing Elijah's journey from humiliation to hope. We've seen how one person's bias can ground a flight and how one teen's courage can lift an entire company. Let us hold tight to empathy, call out discrimination wherever it hides, and remember that dignity belongs to everyone. If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps us bring more stories of justice and change to light. Stay tuned for our next video, because the fight for respect in every corner of our world is far from over.